To be the son of a god is a burden. To be the son of a monster is a curse. But to be the son of Joseph Stalin was a death sentence that began long before the war started. Our story takes us into the shadows of the Kremlin and then out into the blood-soaked fields of the Eastern Front. It is the story of Yakov Dzhugashvili. He was a man born into the epicenter of power, yet he lived his life as an outsider, rejected and despised by the one man whose approval mattered most. The relationship between father and son was not merely cold, it was venomous. In the late 1920s, overwhelmed by the pressure of his existence and the cruelty of his father, a young Yakov attempted to end his own life with a pistol. He fired, but the bullet missed his heart. He survived. When Stalin heard of the attempt, he did not rush to his son's bedside with tears of relief. He did not offer comfort. He simply sneered. He mocked the boy, saying, "He can't even shoot straight." This was the emotional landscape Yakov carried with him when the world exploded in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa had begun. The German Wehrmacht was tearing through the Soviet Union, devouring territory and armies alike. Yakov, seeking perhaps to prove himself, or perhaps simply doing his duty, went to the front. He was a senior lieutenant in the artillery. He did not hide in Moscow. He marched into the fire. By July 1941, the Red Army was in disarray. Yakov found himself at the Battle of Smolensk, a catastrophic meat grinder where the Soviet defense collapsed under the Nazi blitzkrieg. The confusion was absolute. Communications were cut. Regiments were encircled. In the chaos of the retreat near the city of Smolensk, Yakov Dzhugashvili went missing. On July 16, he was captured. At first, the Germans did not know who they had. He was just another officer in a sea of dusty, defeated men. But soon the truth came out. Whether betrayed by his own comrades or identified by his papers, the revelation sent a shockwave through the German high command. They had not just captured a lieutenant, they had captured the son of the Soviet dictator. For the Nazi propaganda machine, this was a gift from the heavens. They moved instantly to exploit him. They printed millions of leaflets. They dropped them from planes over the terrified Soviet trenches. The leaflets bore a picture of Yakov, looking exhausted but alive, surrounded by German officers. The text was a poisoned dart aimed at the heart of every Red Army soldier. It read, "Stalin's son has surrendered. He is being treated well. Why are you still fighting? Surrender like Yakov." It was a lie, of course. Yakov had not surrendered willingly. He had been taken. But the truth mattered little in the war of words. The news reached Moscow. It reached the Kremlin. It reached the desk of Joseph Stalin. A father might have felt fear for his son's safety. A father might have looked for a way to rescue him. But Stalin was not a father. He was the man of steel. His reaction was one of cold, calculating fury. He did not view Yakov as a victim. He viewed him as a traitor. In the eyes of Stalin, there were no prisoners of war, only cowards who failed to die for the motherland. He had already issued Order Number 270, a decree stating that any soldier who surrendered was to be considered a malicious deserter and their families were to be arrested. Stalin did not make an exception for his own blood. In fact, he made an example of it. Because Yakov was a prisoner, his wife, Yulia, was arrested in Moscow. She was thrown into prison, punished for the perceived sins of a husband who was rotting in a German cell. Stalin's heart was a fortress, and the drawbridge was raised. Time passed. The war ground on. The tide began to turn. In early 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad ended with a crushing Soviet victory.
The Red Army captured Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the highest-ranking German officer ever to surrender. The Germans, desperate to get their field marshal back, reached out through the Red Cross. They made an offer, a trade. They would return Yakov Dzhugashvili to the Soviet Union in exchange for Friedrich Paulus. It was a direct swap, a son for a field marshal. Stalin's response to this offer has echoed through history, a testament to his absolute ruthlessness. He did not hesitate. He allegedly replied with a sentence that sealed his son's fate: "I will not trade a marshal for a lieutenant." The door was slammed shut. Yakov was abandoned. He was left to the wolves. By 1943, Yakov had been moved to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp just north of Berlin. He was held in a special section for high-ranking prisoners, but special did not mean comfortable. It was a place of psychological torture. He was surrounded by the high fences, the guard towers, and the constant smell of death from the crematoriums.
His mental state was deteriorating rapidly. He knew his father had rejected him. He knew his wife was in prison because of him. He was trapped in a void of hopelessness. Inside the camp, tensions rose, not just with the guards, but with fellow prisoners. Yakov shared quarters with British officers, including Thomas Cushing and William Murphy. The cultural divide and the stress of confinement led to bitter arguments. They fought over politics, over the war, over the trivialities of prison life. On the evening of April 14, 1943, something inside Yakov finally broke. The exact details of that night are a blur of tragedy, but the outcome is indisputable. There was an argument in the barracks. Yakov, consumed by a sudden dark resolve, stormed out of the building. He refused to go back inside. The camp was silent, save for the hum of the electric lights and the footsteps of the sentries. Yakov walked straight toward the perimeter fence. This was the neutral zone, a strip of land where anyone who entered was shot on sight. A frantic SS guard in the watchtower, a man named Konrad Hofrich, shouted at him, "Halt! Go back to the barracks!" Yakov did not stop. He kept walking, his eyes fixed on the wire. He reached the fence. He grabbed the electrified barbed wire with his bare hands. The voltage surged through his body. At that moment, he turned his face up to the guard tower. He did not beg for mercy. He screamed a final, defiant command at the German soldier. "Shoot!" he yelled. "Shoot me!" The guard obliged. A single shot rang out in the night air. The bullet struck Yakov in the head. He died instantly, his body hanging limp on the electrified wire, suspended between the prison that was Germany and the rejection that was Russia. The Germans, meticulous as always, documented the death. They took photographs of the body tangled in the wire. The autopsy stated he died from the electric shock before the bullet killed him, or perhaps it was the other way around. It did not matter. Yakov Dzhugashvili was gone. For decades, the true circumstances of his death were obscured by Soviet silence and Western confusion. It was only much later that the archives were opened. History looked back on Yakov not as a traitor, but as a tragic figure. He was a man caught between two totalitarian giants, crushed by the machinery of war and the cruelty of his own kin. He had tried to shoot himself as a young man to escape his father, and failed. In the end, in the cold mud of Sachsenhausen, he found the exit he had been looking for. He forced the enemy to do what he could not. He was the lieutenant who was not worth a marshal to his father, but whose lonely, desperate death revealed the terrible human cost of the ideology that ruled them both.